current affairs, facts and opinion, their future in our hands. Markets, globalist technocrats versus the people. A line in the sand. The McIntyre Report.
And welcome back, McIntyre Report, folks. Independent media here, Australian National Review, ANR.news. Follow our 24-hour news headlines. Immigration, it's a great debate, certainly in countries such as Australia, America, all Western countries seem to be facing the same issue. How could it be random? How can Australia be flooded with record immigration, but also the UK, Germany, Sweden, France, America, Canada? Clearly not random. Why is this happening? Why are people confused about who's responsible for it? Why is massive protests either side, but they seem, even in Australia, to blame the wrong people? But surely if this is coordinated, this is an agenda to flood Western societies with mass immigrants, then we should find out who's driving this agenda and why. Today's guests, I'm joined by Peter Brimelow. Peter, welcome to the show. You're an independent journalist, a writer, and you've been quite outspoken on these immigration issues. What's your view on, first of all, is this just random? It just so happens that Australia, Canada, America, Western Europe, England's being flooded by immigrants. Has that just randomly happened that way? Or is this a coordinated agenda that's been planned for some time?
I mean, the purpose of a system is what it does, and the system we have here is flooding every Western country with fantastic numbers of immigrants. It's a real immigrant surge. I mean, immigration has been an issue throughout the Anglosphere for really for 40 or 50 years. But just in the last 5 or 10 years, the numbers have just been doubled and redoubled. In England with the Boris wave, in Canada with what Trudeau did, and of all places in Ireland, the Irish government suddenly opened up the borders, and they're doing it without any pretense of vetting who these people are. So it's quite new, and you have to think there's somewhere that they're all getting together at Davos or somewhere and plotting this out. It seems to be a disease that's afflicted the elites of all the Western world simultaneously.
Yeah, the other question I guess we've got to look at is, who benefits from this? I mean, obviously in Australia, we've seen the highest levels of immigration since the COVID pandemic ended. And then it's come out that they've miscounted. There's more than 1 million more immigrants and population in Australia that they somehow missed 1 million people. So it's above the record levels even again.
Right.
And it's not that, it's not that, I mean, I'm not against immigration as an Australian. I think, immigrants contribute a lot to a country, but it would be based on quality of immigration. And surely the majority of people that live in a country should have a say in policies. But it seems to be it's foreign influence or foreign agenda to Australia or to Canada, to any of the Western countries that's driving this. You mentioned Davos, which has just been on in the World Economic Forum. You'll own nothing but be happy crowd and, eat bugs and insects because the world's burning to the ground, So would you suggest it's maybe the globalist left faction that is driving this record immigration?
Well, I think it's what the famous American lawyer Daniel Webster called a fearful concatenation of circumstances. A lot of things have come together to make this happen. One of them is the elites were utterly traumatized by the Second World War, fighting Hitler and the Nazis, and they just simply went overboard on the other side. They came to the conclusion that any form of national identity, except for Israel, was illegitimate. And I think that you see things like the Prime Minister of Sweden a few years ago said that Swedes have no more right to Sweden than anybody else in the world. They were just utterly traumatized by the experience of the Second World War. I call it Hitler's revenge, what's happening now. I think also there's no doubt that the business elites were convinced that cheap labor was an absolutely unmitigated good. particularly when they can dump the cost of the cheap labor onto the social welfare system. In other words, if people bring their children in, the children are educated at public expense. In a lot of the world, that's a tremendous transfer that's worth a lot of money. I think the per capita GDP of Haiti is like $5,000, and the per pupil spending of the US is like nearly $20,000. So you're making a transfer of $20,000 a year to these Haitian legal immigrant kids. I think you have to also, frankly, look at the influence of the various Jewish lobbies in going around the world. They've always been on in everywhere all around the world. They're always in favor of mass immigration. In my book Alienation that I published in '95, I actually quoted a Jewish activist called Earl Raab, who said directly that it was a very good thing. Jews were in favor of non-white immigration to the US because they wanted to make it impossible for a white nationalist party to come to power. Of course, what it's done is exactly the reverse. It's actually exacerbated anti-Jewish feeling in the US. I've been here 55 years, and I've never seen as much conscious anti-Jewish feeling. And finally, there's a lot of problems with doctrinaire libertarians. I mean, there's a libertarian spread right through the world and has many good points, but on the other hand, it's most of them can't handle the issue of national identity, and that's very unfortunate.
Yeah, you raised some interesting points there, because you look in Australia, and I've called this out as well, and I'm certainly not anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish. Many of my friends, and even billionaire friends, are Jewish, but they also are heavy influence in the property market, and they have also agendas to increase immigration. Like in America, they can just print more money with the Fed. In Australia, they can print immigrants, in other words, they flood it in recent years to stop the property market crashing. So there is obviously powerful agendas there. But the Jewish lobby is very powerful in Australia, and people are starting to realize that more. I mean, who controls the immigration policy? We held a free speech summit last year, and it was the only nation that opposed that free speech happening was Israeli activists. Surprisingly, they cancelled the event a few days out. We had to move. But they were able to get the Australian government within days of some of our American speakers arriving to speak at a free speech summit, banned from the country for social media posts that were critical of a certain nation dropping bombs on children in the Middle East. So people can't, it was no longer, it went from being a conspiracy that certain foreign powers or have influence in Australia's immigration policy to becoming very real. Let's just watch this clip from you through Tucker Carlson. I saw that and I thought it was quite interesting. Let's just show our viewers that.
I think the congressional Republicans hated us talking about immigration because it upsets the donors. And I think that was influential with Bill. He liked being lionized by the then Republican majority in the House. And I think
so. The Republican leadership didn't like it. Newt Gingrich,
Right.
et cetera, who was ascendant, came in '94 to much fanfare, achieved not a lot, but they're the ones who pressured Bill Buckley, you believe?
I think that was true, but I also think that the neocons in New York hated the line, and Bill was very, very leery of offending the neoconservatives, people like Norman Podhoretz and so on. And I think they pressured him I know they pressured him to get rid of John.
Now, why would they care?
Oh, because at that point, the neoconservatives, who were predominantly Jewish faction, they had this sort of Ellis Island view of America. They wanted to, they're extremely frightened of the white majority in America becoming self-conscious because they feel, as Jews, that it will leave them out in the cold.
Despite the fact there's never been any real anti-Semitic movement in the United States, there's no evidence that.
It's interesting you raise that, because in Australia, before the ramping up of what's happened recently with the Bondi massacre and with the fake caravan plot that was done to bring in anti-Semitism laws, which many suspected, and in evidence has suggested that Israel was actually behind that themselves, to drum up this anti-Semitism. Australian Jewish community has always been well respected. I mean, half my friends are Jewish in Australia, and I didn't notice any anti-Semitism towards Jewish. So this why do you think there is this fear? They're afraid that a white nationalist leader like a Hitler could come to power in predominantly white European nations, and that's why they might be left to the side? Or is there a bigger play here? Because you could look at it this way, Peter. There's only one nation that's dropping bombs on excess Muslim nations, and then it appears that there's excess Muslims, the ones that are being flooded around the world. So we can't really blame the Muslims from having to be forced to leave from their country. They're not bombing their own nations, to my knowledge.
Yes, actually, the Israeli charities have actually encouraged the Syrians to leave. For example, they were instrumental in getting this wave of 1 million Syrians to go into Germany. They're obviously trying to ethnically cleanse the Middle East at the expense of Germany. And it's very risky. Now, having said that, in the US, the leading proponent of immigration reduction, Stephen Miller, who's the deputy chief of staff of the White House, is Jewish. And he's a very tough guy. And his position is very radical. He wants absolutely all illegals thrown out, and he obviously wants to really reduce legal immigration dramatically. In fact, they have a de facto moratorium in most of the world at the moment. Unfortunately, it's all done by executive actions and not done by statute. So if the Democrats get in, they'll reverse it.
Yeah, so it is, because you see even in Israel, there's obviously a lot of opposition to Netanyahu and a lot of protests. Yeah. And I even know, talking to a lot of my Jewish friends, I don't know any of them that go, I stand with Netanyahu dropping bombs on children.
Actually, when I was running my website, vdare.com, which was suspended because of lawfare from the New York Attorney General a couple of years ago, we had a running tag called Netanyahu for president, because he did some very sensible things about immigration in Israel, into Israel. For example, he built this wall. They at the time when the worthless Bush Republicans and the Democrats were saying walls were immoral and wouldn't work anyway, the Israelis went right ahead and built a wall, and it's a big wall. It's because of the peculiar geography of the Israeli border. It's about nearly 700 miles long, so it's about a quarter of the length it would of the wall that the Americans are going to have to build across their southern border. And he just systematically eliminated African illegal immigrants. He just threw them out, and he put them into what were in effect concentration camps and forced them to go home. Or alternatively, unscrupulously, he would encourage them to go to Europe. But in terms of keeping Israel, the national fabric of Israel, Jewish, his activities were exemplary. I wish we had somebody like him. Well, actually, we do. Stephen Miller is like him.
Yeah, it's interesting. They had that policy, but we're attacked in countries like Australia if we oppose mass immigration. Pauline Hanson was a politician you may have heard of in Australia. Years ago, basically, we're being swamped by Asians. And obviously, I know growing up as a white Australian, we were called racist. And we just maybe learned to accept it because we thought maybe we are racist. But then I'm thinking, I don't think we're racist. We just asked the basic question: why is it difficult for people, white Europeans, to come to Australia, or Americans or Canadians that would assimilate very easily? Why is that? Why is it difficult for them to come, but you can come from a nation that is completely different, and you're allowed in and 20 of your friends? That always was a question we had, but we were basically silenced as Australians by being told we're racist. I mean, who's driving this, that we're racist for? Going, why don't we? We were a predominantly white nation. Why don't we?
Entirely white under the White Australia policy, of course, which should never have been abolished. I mean, it was. I actually knew there's an American academic called Herb London, one of the leading neoconservative, who was very supportive of me and when I raised the immigration issue. Then one day I found out that as a young man, he'd been in Australia and he had written a lot of articles opposing the White Australia policy. So I said, "What's this, Herb?" And he said, "Well, I was wrong." Now he tells us. Yeah,
because if you look at, say, I mean, I'm not against immigration. I realize it adds a lot of value, but I believe in quality immigration, and the national identity should choose which immigrants come, which will assimilate and preserve the culture and national identity.
If I can interrupt you, you say it adds a lot of value, but when I looked into, I'm a financial journalist. I work for Forbes and for Fortune, At one point, I even worked for the Wall Street Journal editorial page. Amazingly, I looked into the technical debate on immigration that had gone on among Labour economists, and I found that by the early 1990s, the conclusion was that immigration, essentially, the immigration that had come into the US since the 65 Act was passed, the Hart-Celler Act, which opened the floodgates, had essentially not benefited the native born at all. It does increase GDP, but almost all of that is captured by the immigrants themselves in the form of the wages. However, what it does do is it causes tremendous redistribution of income within the native-born community, basically from labor to the owners of capital. And it was substantial, it's like 3% of GDP. So, of course, that explains the whole class nature of this debate. It can be explained in very simple Marxist terms. The capitalist class is benefiting from the immigrants coming in and beating down wage rates. And that's why all the country club Republicans and so on, and I'm sure you've got the equivalent in Australia, like immigration. But George Bush actually was stupid enough to say that he liked immigration because he had wonderful Hispanic servants. I mean, how about stupid can you get? You know, it's a classical upper class mistake.
It's interesting. Because in America you do get the cheap labor. In Australia, we don't even get that benefit. We get flooded by immigrants, but they get paid the same and high. And I want people to be paid well, but I've always advocated in Australia, immigrants, when to get a visa, come in and like you start at a lower wage and you work your way up 3 or 4 years, like serving an apprenticeship. You're earning your right to earn a full wage in a country. So we have manufacturing and some cheaper labor, but we have no benefit of that. We have record high property prices. My issue is, let's say India. India is the #1 amount of immigrants in Australia right now. But if we as white people were to go to India and then go, let's dominate India and flood it with mostly white people to make Indians a minority, beside the fact it's mathematically impossible, but India would have every right to go, well, no, we don't mind foreigners here, etc., but we don't want to
when I was writing my immigration book, we called up every major sender of immigrants to the US. One of them was already India. This was 30 years ago. And we said, we're an American and we want to immigrate to your country. The results were absolutely hilarious. What the Indians said was, well, are you of Indian heritage? No. Oh, well, it is practically impossible to immigrate to India if you're not. They're running a brown India policy there. You can go back to India if you are actually Indian. The Japanese flat out said it's not possible to immigrate to Australia, to Japan. You know. So it's not. There's no reciprocity here. They know perfectly what they're doing. The question is, what are we doing?
Yeah, we're certainly, I would say we're being silenced, and white people, it's not just about white people, but the national identity. Like, look at England. England, predominant, as you know, a white nation. But
when I was born, England was 99.9% white in 1947. I mean, the change has been absolutely staggering. And of course, one of the really amazing things is that you got what appeared to be a nationalist government, a national conservative government elected under Boris Johnson, who finally consummated Brexit. But then he turns around and opens the borders. Absolutely extraordinary. I mean, it's despite campaigning on exactly the opposite. So the fix is in here with these Western governments. And they will pay the price for it. I mean, when I you know, we've already seen a revolution in the US. I mean, it's the immigration issue that basically elected Donald Trump in the teeth of the most extraordinary opposition. I mean, everybody in the world who was anybody was opposed to it. The only people in favor of him were you know, the people, basically. Similarly, it looks like the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, the Uni Party, is in Britain has succeeded in shooting itself in the head, because it looks like Reform Party, which is not a particularly radical party, but it has the advantage of not being either Labour or Conservative. It looks like they will sweep the next election, which is still some time off, of course, unless they manage to shoot Nigel Farage. Or you know, catch him in bed with a boy, although that would probably help in Britain with the British elite.
Yeah, I had a chance to catch up with Nigel Farage at CPAC a year ago, actually, at Washington in February.
Oh, really?
And he obviously, he speaks very well, but also I assume for him to get where he wants to go, he's going to have to keep good relations with Israel, which seems to come back having a lot of influence over our politicians. Just on a separate issue, the statistics I've heard, the white people in the world used to be 31% of the world's population. It's down to 7%. There's clearly a trend there. Where do you see this heading next 5-10 years for white people?
It's obviously very bad, particularly if they lose control of the nations lose control of the states. You know, and that's really what's happening here. I mean, the degree of censorship that you see in England now to repress any resistance to criticism of immigration is simply extraordinary, and it's actually worse in some respects in Europe. You're not even allowed to discuss the fact that there's a great replacement going on. That's apparently racist. It's heading in a very bad direction. All I can say is that miracles happen quite frequently in politics. I mean, nobody expected the Soviet Union to collapse. And conversely, I personally never expected the Afrikaners to give up control of their state. And look what's happened to them. So, you know, we have to hope for a miracle, and we need one. We need one.
Yeah, and you raise that issue. Look at, say, Russia, which is a predominantly white Christian nation, where Putin, obviously in the West, we're told to hate Putin. He's meant to be an evil dictator, but you know, independent thinkers realize that and even Tucker Carlson highlighted recently that, you know, whatever you say about Russia, but since Putin come to power, he's transformed that nation, and it's heading in the right direction. Fiscally, it has a lower debt than the West. It's doing quite well despite massive sanctions, but they have an immigration policy which seems to be works quite well. It's not that they're against immigrants, but they still want to maintain the predominant Russian culture. And that's criticized.
If I can just interrupt, there's very interesting things happening in what they used to call the near abroad, you know, the stands, the Kazakhstan and so on. Kazakhstan was an interesting case because, you know, it broke away from the Soviet Union, obviously, when the Soviet Union broke up. But it was on the verge of becoming majority Russian because of tremendous heavy immigration into northern Kazakhstan under the Soviet Union. Well, now they've reversed that completely. The Russian proportion of the population is plummeting. And that's been done by a whole series of government policies. So this is an example of a nation which is getting control of its state and making sure that it does have control of its state, which raises the issue of remigration. I think that's something that's essential in the Western world. We've got to start moving these people out. Otherwise, these countries will cease to exist. I mean, the US is not going to be a functioning liberal democracy if whites go into a minority.
Well, it's interesting because what I'm recognizing a trend, and I predicted many financial trends, and I've told my investor clients, is that a big trend now, you'll see it's already happening, particularly started since COVID. I live in Indonesia mostly. As a journalist, it's safer to live in Indonesia than Australia, ironically. But there's a massive trend. I joke Bali is the global refugee camp of the world, but there's this trend now of Westerners leaving, you know, Australia, Canada, America, Western Europe, particularly Western Europe. A lot of Europeans moving to Indonesia or Malaysia or Thailand or expat in Mexico, expat countries. So there's this reverse trend of brain drain where the West will start to suffer brain drain, that some of the smartest people, the people that recognize things happening ahead of time, going, where will Australia be or America be 5-10 years from now? Is this the country that we grew up in, or England? Is that where we want to live, or do we have to seriously consider, even if we don't want to, relocating out of the West to be a more affordable location or a safer location? You know, it's crazy that you could 50 years ago or 20 years ago, you would have never said this could ever happen to our own countries, but it's happening in our own lifetime.
But are people bringing up the children in Indonesia? White families, whole families moving to Indonesia? Or is it mainly single people?
No, it's both. Obviously, digital nomads, but yeah, you got whole families moving because it's very good. I mean, in Australia, to have adult, you know, daycare center and those things, it's so expensive. But in places like Indonesia, there's a lot of helpers, nannies, assistants, and they have traditional values as well. I think a lot of people are so turned off by what's happened in the West with the globalist left, with the wokeism and transgenderism and all these policies pushed through school even now, that a lot of them are rejecting that, going, ironically, we moved to a Muslim country, we're safer and they have more closer values, in Indonesia, traditional values of family values and happier people. And of course, no nation is perfect, but Indonesia's been another example once they kicked out Suharto regime 25, 26 years ago that has moved in the direction of financially successful and becoming predicted to be a top 4 economy in the world by 2050. So, and Suharto obviously was a lot of Israel influence of genocide and trying to steal, Western imperialism of stealing resources. So we see this pattern when, but I say it's ironic because in the West, we're told to hate on Muslims. Yet I live in the biggest Muslim nation on the planet, and their values are more closer aligned to what we grew up with, the Christian traditional values. I mean, it's completely reversed.
Well, my own nephew here, who's an American kid, has just spent 2 years in Japan speaking English, teaching English, I should say. And of course, he can't stay. They don't allow him to stay. And he's deeply depressed about this. He said he said when he came back from, Japan works, America doesn't, is what it comes down to. When I came to the US in 1970, America was the world leader in practically everything. But that's no longer the case. The highways are decaying and the cities are in terrible shape, and there hasn't really been any serious, any major breakthroughs in terms of living standards and technology and so on, like there has been in Japan or Singapore. They've leapfrogged America, and a lot of Americans are increasingly aware of this and becoming uncomfortable. Well, the point is that my nephew could not stay in Japan. They have no intention of allowing non-Japanese minorities to develop there.
So that touches on what's the solution. I mean, what do we have to do in countries like Australia and England and America to reverse this? Is it too late, or what has to happen, do you think?
Oh, it's not true. There has to be some kind of a nationalist government elect. One thing about it is the whole Anglosphere moves together. There isn't one Anglosphere country that's immune from this. So conversely, if one Anglosphere country does break away from it, the ripples could go right through the country, right through the Anglosphere. I think Trump, in that respect, is a transitional figure. Eventually there will be a government that gets control of the immigration policy here, imposes a moratorium for 100 years, encourages remigration, and does various other things, like, for example, kick Puerto Rico out of the force Puerto Rico to be independent. Otherwise, the Democrats are going to make it a state, and it will vote Democrat forever. I think they should extend it. At the moment, when you're a legal resident, if you're here 5 years, you can become a citizen. I think the length of time should be increased. 20 years wouldn't be too short. These people have got to be, and the most important thing, of course, is abolishing birthright citizenship. That is, the idea that even if an illegal alien has a child in the US, that child is an American citizen. It's utter nonsense. It's just a judge-made law, and Trump at least Trump is trying to undo that. And if the Supreme Court won't let them do it by executive action, it will have to be done by statute. But one way or another, it has to be done. These people have to be kept out of the political community. They cannot be allowed to vote. And that's the case in Switzerland. I mean, Switzerland has a huge foreign population, but they almost never naturalize. Or for that matter, in the Gulf states. I mean, the Gulf. I was arguing with a libertarian economist at one of the think tanks in Washington the other day, and he was saying, the ideal immigration policy is run by the Gulf states in the Persian Gulf. There's anybody skilled immigrants, and come in at all the time, but they never vote. They're not allowed to be citizens, and they're there for a fixed period of time. Then the Emirates throw them out, or the Bahrainis throw them out. They have no intention of allowing the native Arabs to be outvoted. That's the kind of thinking we have to see in the Anglosphere.
And if we look back at the Israel issue, what I understand, it appears that there's two factions. Obviously, you've got the left faction, Zionism, what we call the globalist elite, which most people reject unless they're extreme left. But then you have the right faction, Zionists, which is the Netanyahu, etc. Both those seem to want a one world government, ideally, which I certainly don't support. Then the only other alliance that I see that's saying, hey, we don't need to go that way, we should go multipolar world, is what they call the BRICS, the BRICS plus nations.
Right.
I see in Australia that we're divided consistently politically and on media. You got the right-wing Murdoch media, obviously American England as well. Then the left, you got the Fairfax, which become the Soros-type globalist-controlled left-wing media, which is pushes all the wokeism. So wherever we're divided left and right, I think left and right is a way to make us think we have a democracy, and we're both leading to one world government. I see the only way is what you mentioned before: a nationalist leader that's truly independent, wants to support the nationalist identity. But the BRICS talk a lot of sense to me. I think they talk a multipolar world. I think Russia could be a good counterbalance to too much power in China. But the idea of nations working together, trade, not war, because if we look at most wars on the planet, America's dragged in to fight those wars, what you could say banker wars. All wars are generally banker wars fought over who controls the issuance of currency. And the banking cartel state is hard to deny that's not Israel. So any war, World War III is, generally Israel is at the cause of that, or the people behind that. So what's your thoughts on BRICS? You have much thoughts on that, or definitely on thoughts on a multipolar world versus a one world government?
I think that, yes, I think people think that Trump's, American imperialist and a bully and all that kind of thing. But what he actually is he's implicitly calling for retrenchment of American influence in the world. He doesn't think that they're going to be able to underwrite, for example, European defense indefinitely. It's really a retreat to what I see as a fortress America, and that's why he's so interested in Canada and in Greenland. Trump is in some respects an expression of weakness, a recognition of weakness for America, a recognition that the world is not unipolar anymore. So I think that's implicit in his foreign policy. Now, his foreign policy is distorted enormously, of course, because of the need to appease the Zionist lobby in the US. And a lot of what he's doing is just clearly designed to keep them off his back. And it's a question of how far they can push him. At the moment, he's been maneuvering to avoid actually invading Iran. But he'll do it if they don't leave me any alternative, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's a big issue, hasn't it been? Obviously, I saw that CPAC last year at Washington when Trump was there, etc. That we reported. Obviously, many of us supported the Trump Revolution. MAGA movement was huge, but I recognized then and reported there was a split in MAGA starting then. And this is going to get bigger and bigger because most of MAGA was make America great again, but it was America first. And they definitely didn't want it to be Israel first. They wanted Israel to be last. But this is, I think...
Well, the Israelis embarked an incredibly ambitious policy under Netanyahu. I mean, they seem to think they're going to be able to make themselves a hegemonic power in the Middle East. And at a really important point in the world, it's the juncture of the world island. I wouldn't be surprised if they actually intend to annex the Saudi oil fields, which is just the maps you see of Greater Israel. The Saudi oil fields are just slides to the south and east of them. It's the top right-hand corner of Saudi Arabia that has all the oil. I don't think that Trump really wants to underwrite that, because it's going to take an awful lot of killing to make that happen, which Netanyahu is prepared to do. But I don't see. I don't see. I mean, I've been here 55 years. There isn't really any real American support for that. They don't mind bombing. They will bomb people and so on, but I don't see them supporting the occupying and holding down large areas of the Middle East. I say that my own son was a Marine and he was in Afghanistan, which he thoroughly enjoyed, by the way. He didn't think it was any use, served any political purpose, but it was fun flying drones around it and shooting at people and so on. But it didn't serve any American interest that I can see, and of course it's completely failed. So
as far as, obviously, some people say World War III, we're already in it, or it's certainly coming that way. If Israel was removed from the equation, would the world be more peaceful? America could mind its own business and be America first and not dragged into Israel's wars. and Trump was elected to make America first. If Trump was able to achieve what he promised, would America and the world be better off if America become even more nationalist and, I guess you'd say, isolated? But I mean, multipolar. In other words, we support trade, not war, and we don't have to destroy China. China's not this threat that the West makes out, that they can maybe coexist. I mean, China seems to want to do trade. China's not starting wars that I see. I mean, I don't know. What's your view? Is China this big threat that we're told the communists are coming? That's a bit old. That one kind of used to keep people scared in the 60s and 70s and the Vietnam War. But I think now that's why they created terrorism, global terrorism, because communism wasn't a threat anymore.
The West, America in particular, simply didn't rethink its global strategy after the collapse of the Soviet Union. They continued to behave as if the Soviet Union was still there. I'm afraid that's very largely due to what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. They wanted to have a high defense budget, and they wanted to spend a lot of money on having bases in interesting places. And I really don't understand why NATO, for example, is still around, and I particularly don't understand why it's extending itself to the Baltic states and to the Caucasus and so on. I don't even see how they could be defended if the Russians want to attack them. So there's some kind of a momentum that's developed by the foreign policy establishment that needs to be broken here. I don't think they've really seriously they've really dealt with the fact that the Soviet Union no longer exists. About China, I just don't know. I mean, it does appear to be active all over the world, and it does appear to be building up a very serious military. But on the other hand, it has tremendous internal demographic problems. And I used to write for Market Watch, Dow Jones Market Watch, and on investment letters. And there was a period in there when these Chinese letters were really hot and they're making vast amounts of money and so on. And so I was always writing about them. And I realized, I mean, maybe you can give me your view on this, but I realized that these letters, from these letters, nobody understands how the Chinese economy works. And there's not a price system there. And they occasionally seem to make tremendous errors, and the banking system has to be bailed out and so on. I just don't see how it works. I mean, they have a lot of hardworking people, and if the government doesn't actually suppress them like the communists were doing, I can see that things would go ahead. But fundamentally, I just find the economy absolutely baffling. What do you think about the Chinese economy? As you know, there's constant warnings that have been for 20 years that there's going to be a huge crash in China.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is Western, obviously pushing to try and create that as, if you look at, they say, well, China, loans money to emerging nations or third world nations just to get them into debt and then to take over their assets. And I always say, well, if that's true, I wonder where they learned that from. Clearly from the West, but statistically, it's not. When I looked into it, China's loans are typically much lower than what the West does, IMF, etc. I mean, my views changed in recent times. I'm more pro-China than I used to be because I see, hang on, we've got to give them some credit. We call them communism, but it's not typical communism. I mean, they have private ownership and they've done very well economically. So and they aren't building military bases everywhere in the world, even though they are building up a strong military. But their rhetoric seems to match what they say. They don't want war. They want multipolar world. They want to trade. We also have to give credit to Chinese immigrants. You've got to say they're probably the most successful immigrants in every country. There's always been Chinese immigrants, but they always worked hard, kept their head down, never caused any problems. That I've seen, where you can't say that about every other type of immigrants from different countries. So I think the BRICS, I think that is good for the world, a multipolar world. I think Russia is a good counterbalance to the rise of China, but I don't see it has to be a dog-eat-dog world. It's like, why can't America be a successful nation and China and Russia and these bigger nations I think there's plenty of abundance in the world for everyone to get along. It's not, America has this attitude they have to destroy their enemy and they have to be the dominant power. I think that's I think that's self-defeating. There's plenty for everyone to do well. So I don't think we should see.
By the way, I don't think that's Trump's attitude. I think, as I say, what he's talking about is retrenchment. He doesn't put it in those terms because he's a bully and a boaster and all that kind of thing. But I think what he's actually saying is talking about retrenchment, and that's very significant. And it does, as you're quite right, it's a tremendous break from the bipartisan foreign policy establishment that exists in the US. I mean, one question which fascinates me is you probably know in the US that we've had this phenomenon of Somali immigrants turn out to be ripping off the government, the welfare system in all kinds of ways, and fantastically huge numbers, billions of dollars. That money must be finished up in politicians' pockets in Minnesota and so on. I just don't believe the Saudis have done. I don't even think they've, as Trump said at Davos, I don't even think they're capable of figuring out these kind of frauds. And I wonder about the Ukraine in this regard. I mean, there's enormous amounts of money imported to Ukraine war, completely unnecessary. I see no American interest in the Ukraine, in this Ukraine war. Maybe it's just there's wholesale bribery going on. Maybe the whole Western elite is profiting from this. I can't think of any other explanation.
Yeah, no, I'd certainly agree, Peter. You look at the left, the globalist left politicians, they're easily bought because they tend to be people that have never gone out of being entrepreneurial and made money and worked hard. So their idea of getting rich is theft, basically, from the government. So the left has always been easy to buy. I think, not that they have a monopoly on corruption. But yeah, Ukraine is just absurd. Why go and provoke Russia, start a fight with Russia, do a coup with Soros and Victoria Nuland were behind in 2014, and then say Russia started a 9-year-old war now 3 years ago. I mean, they can't even add up basic maths. But I mean, Russia, in our view, at independent media here in Australia, we believe Russia had every right to defend its borders, every right to defend the Russian ethnics in eastern Ukraine. And of course, I think it got fading powers. Like, we look at the British Empire and the British government yaps off at Russia, but the British military wouldn't last 2 weeks against Russia. I mean, it's like a has-been power where, Starmer needs to be told, look, you're a chihuahua barking at, a Russian bear. Really,
well, it seems to be something that the entire European elite seems to have decided to do. And Starmer clearly liked back in the European Union, and he's just going along with what the Brussels says. They don't have. I mean, I've seen estimates that they have perhaps 40,000 effective troops in Britain. It's minute. That their army has been completely eviscerated.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Trump's smart enough to go, well, if we're going to...
The issue isn't really whether the Russians have the... I understand your argument, but the issue isn't whether the Russians have the right to reclaim their co-nationals in the Ukraine, the Russian-speaking Ukrainians. The question is, why is this anything to do with us broadly? I mean, if the Ukraine... I have great sympathy for the Ukrainians, actually, and I have sympathy for the Russians too. I think they're both martyr nations who suffered terribly in the 20th century. But is this a long way from Britain, and it's even further from Australia and America? Why are we arguing about the border in the Ukraine?
Yeah, and I think we have to look into it. What we've found also, it comes back to the Israel issue. The left faction Zionists seem, obviously, even Tucker Carlson raised it, a lot of them come from there originally. Eastern Ukraine is where they're from. And whether they wanted to take Ukraine back, kill the Slavic population or genocide it and make it a Israel 2 in case Israel 1 falls. You see Argentina now under Milei. There's a massive amount of Israelis moving into Argentina, and there's now issues they're raising. If Israel does fall, if it keeps provoking a fight with Iran, there is a strong possibility Israel may no longer exist as a nation. Where do they go then? Do they take Argentina? Or I think their dream of Ukraine is dead. Russia said, no, it's not going to happen. So I think those things are still they play a part, but it's absurd for Europe to think they're going to pick a fight with Russia, and how else they think it's going to end. Russia's fighting for their survival. So of course they're going to defend their borders with everything they've got. But I was going to say Trump is smart enough, I think, to go, hang on a minute, why are we supporting these globalist left that want war with Russia? We should have good relations with Russia. And I just don't get why even in Australia it's stupid. Russia is a Christian nation with traditional values, and Putin for years has wanted to work with the West. He's never been the aggressor. He's always said wanted to partner with the West. He's made that super clear, and falling on deaf ears because most of the West is run by, obviously, military-industrial complex and these globalist elites that somehow think they're going to destroy Russia, raid it like they did in the Soviet Union, and Russia.
Right, it's really baffling, and there's a common view in the on the U.S. right, conservatives, that there's a lot of Jewish hatred of the Russians for atavistic reasons because of the pogroms in the early 20th century, the late 19th century. But in between then and now, they were hating Germany. They seem to have. Have they forgotten that? And I'm not. It's very hard for me to believe that it's an atavistic hatred of Russia, just because they have so many other people to hate. And when I was growing up, the typical Jewish attitude towards Russia was that it was wonderful, and it had defeated the Nazis, and there was a tremendous amount of pro-communism among British and American Jews. What happened to that? I don't know. I really don't understand what the course that Western foreign policy has taken since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Pat Buchanan, wrote a long essay for Newsweek about what should happen after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and he thought he was in favor of multipolarity and America coming home and all that kind of thing. It was completely ignored. The Bush administration simply wanted to swan around the world, and I guess there's a lot of momentum behind the military-industrial complex. I'm still thinking about it.
Yeah, and I think with the military-industrial complex, of course, they profit from war in Ukraine. I've heard as much as 50% of the weapons have been resold to. It's one of the most countries on the planet. They say Russia's corrupt, but Russia was corrupt. It still is, but it's going in the right direction, cleaning up their corruption.
But it's an utter tragedy. It's an utter tragedy. I lived in a Ukrainian city in Canada, Winnipeg. There's a lot of Ukrainians, and the stories they would tell you about getting out from the Soviet Union and so on. They were terribly oppressed by the communists. And I was extremely. I was actually in the Soviet Union in '89, and we were in the Ukraine, and there were Canadian Ukrainians in the party, and they annoyed the officials we were interviewing by talking to them in Ukrainian, whereas they were talking Russian. I think the independence of Ukraine was a wonderful and magical thing, and I'm just utterly horrified that it's taken this direction.
Yeah, it's talks of it's one of the most deadliest wars with drone warfare, etc. 1.3 million it's estimated now of Ukrainian soldier deaths. Obviously, that figure's been hidden greatly. Russia's obviously 10-15% of that. So it's mostly Ukrainians that have suffered, and they're kidnapping them off the streets and sending to the front line. A war that never needed to happen, and Putin tried for a long time for the Minsk agreements to have autonomy and stop this war. But the West's crazy, like they're warmongers. But anyhow, thanks for your time today, Peter. It's fascinating geopolitical, what's going on in the world in 2026. We expect it so much, and it's happening. And so not even through the first month yet. And things just seem to be speeding up to what they used to be. What happens in a month used to take a year. But I appreciate your time and your insight. Might get you back sometime on the McIntyre Report.
Say hello to the Chinese economy for me. I've not studied it for several years.
Yeah, we might check that out and see how they're able to do what they do and keep it functioning. But anyway, take care. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks so much.
There we have Peter Brimelow. Interesting chatting about immigration. Many people are confused in Australia why we have record immigration. and why it seems to be happening in all parts of the world. Hopefully that answers some of your questions. That's all we have for this episode, folks. We'll be back next week with more on the McIntyre Report.
Opportunities like this don't appear when a destination is already famous. Introducing Nasara Bay City, a newly reimagined coastal city in South Lombok. Designed as a low-density, nature-integrated mini-city, not a high-rise mega-project. Beachfront living, resort-style amenities, and a master plan built for long-term growth. This is where early vision becomes long-term value.